In July of 1518, a woman named Frau Trophia stepped into a narrow street in Strasbourg and began to dance. She didn't stop. Not that hour, not that day. 6 days later, she was still moving, feet bleeding through her shoes, and by then 34 other people had joined her, dancing in the same trance with no music playing at all. Within a month, historians estimate 400 people were dancing through this medieval city, and some of them didn't survive it. Their hearts simply gave out from exhaustion, and they collapsed in the street. The city's own physicians looked at this epidemic and made a call so strange it sounds like fiction. They told everyone to keep dancing, and even hired musicians to keep the rhythm going. Stay with me, because 5 centuries later, scientists are still fighting over what actually happened in Strasbourg, and the leading explanation is stranger than any curse. Nobody in Strasbourg had ever seen anything like Frau Trophia. She was, by every account, an ordinary housewife, married, unremarkable, with no history of illness or fits. Then one afternoon, without any warning, she walked outside and started to move her body in a frantic, joyless rhythm that didn't match any known dance of the era. Neighbors described her face as blank, almost absent, as if she wasn't controlling her own limbs. She kept going through the evening, through the night, and into the next morning, collapsing only from sheer exhaustion before getting back up to continue. City officials were baffled and, following the medical thinking of the time, assumed she was suffering from something called hot blood, an overheated condition they believed could be cured by more physical exertion, not less. That single decision, born from a misunderstanding of the human body, was about to make everything catastrophically worse. Here's where the story turns from strange to almost unbelievable. Instead of restraining Frau Trophia, authorities cleared out a guild hall and later a grain market, built a wooden stage, and paid professional musicians with drums and pipes to accompany her. The idea was that dancing it out of her system would break the fever. Instead, watching her seemed to trigger something in others. Within a week, 34 more residents were dancing beside her, day and night, in the same eerie, involuntary way. By August, contemporary chronicles, including physician Paracelsus's later account, put the number near 400 participants, all moving through the streets and public squares of a city of roughly 20,000 people. That means as much as 2% of the entire population was caught in this compulsion simultaneously, dancing not out of joy, but seemingly against their own will, unable to stop even as their bodies broke down. And their bodies really were breaking down. Chroniclers at the time recorded that at the epidemic's peak, as many as 15 people were dying every single day from strokes, heart attacks, and sheer physical collapse brought on by non-stop movement in the summer heat. Feet swelled and bled inside worn-through shoes. People foamed at the mouth. Some reportedly danced until they broke ribs or simply dropped and never got up again. This wasn't a festival or a performance, and witnesses were clear about that distinction. The dancers looked tormented, not joyful, moving with a grim, mechanical desperation, as if their bodies had been hijacked by something outside their control. Local clergy grew alarmed and began to suspect this wasn't medical at all, but a curse sent down from heaven as punishment. And specifically, they pointed a finger at one particular medieval saint whose legend was tangled up with dancing plague for centuries before Strasbourg ever happened. That saint was Saint Vitus, a 3rd century martyr who, according to Catholic tradition, could curse people with compulsive dancing if they angered him. By late August 1518, city officials abandoned the music cure entirely and instead marched the afflicted dancers to a shrine in the nearby mountains, forced red shoes onto their feet, walked them around a wooden statue of the saint, and prayed over them for absolution. Remarkably, the chronicles say the epidemic finally began to fade. Whether that was coincidence, exhaustion, or the sheer psychological power of a ritual everyone believed in, we simply don't know. What's fascinating is that this belief in a dancing curse wasn't unique to Strasbourg. It was already centuries old by 1518, rooted in a pattern of outbreaks that had rattled towns across the Holy Roman Empire long before this particular summer. And understanding that pattern is the key to what researchers now think actually happened. Strasbourg wasn't an isolated incident, and that fact alone should stop you in your tracks. Similar outbreaks were recorded as far back as 1374, when a dancing mania swept through Aachen and spread along the Rhine into Cologne, Metz, and dozens of other towns, reportedly drawing thousands of participants across the region over the following months. Smaller episodes cropped up repeatedly for the next century and a half, almost always in the same part of Europe, almost always following the same eerie script. Sudden compulsive movement, spreading crowds, exhaustion, and eventual religious intervention. That pattern is a massive clue. A fungal poison couldn't explain outbreaks separated by decades and hundreds of miles that all converged on the identical cultural belief about the same saint. Something else was spreading between these communities, something that traveled through shared fear and shared faith rather than through food, water, or air, and that distinction changes the entire diagnosis. So what actually caused it? For decades, the popular theory was ergot poisoning, a toxic mold called Claviceps purpurea that grows on damp rye and produces compounds chemically related to LSD, capable of causing hallucinations and convulsions. It's a compelling idea, but most historians now reject it because ergot poisoning also causes gangrene, violent vomiting, and burning sensations in the limbs, symptoms nobody in Strasbourg ever reported. The far more accepted explanation today is mass psychogenic illness, a genuine, involuntary stress response that can spread through a community exactly like a contagious disease, without any pathogen at all. The conditions in Alsace in 1518 were brutal enough to trigger it. Catastrophic famine, smallpox, syphilis outbreaks, and a peasantry already convinced that an angry Saint Vitus could curse them with uncontrollable dancing. Under extreme collective stress and belief, researchers argue the mind can override the body entirely, and it apparently did for 100 times over. Here's the twist that makes this whole story even darker. The city's own cure very likely made the epidemic worse. By clearing a stage, hiring musicians, and treating the dancing as something to be performed rather than suppressed, Strasbourg's authorities essentially built an amplifier for a psychological contagion nobody understood, turning private torment into a public spectacle that pulled in hundreds more terrified onlookers. It's a sobering reminder that the line between mind and body is far thinner than we like to believe, and that belief itself, at large enough scale, can become a physical force capable of killing people in the street. Mass psychogenic illness hasn't vanished either. Smaller documented clusters still appear in schools and factories today, proof this isn't purely medieval superstition. So the next time you assume your body is entirely under your own control, remember Strasbourg in the summer of 1518, when 400 people danced themselves toward death and nobody could explain why. Subscribe for more stories like this.